And so it's a real pleasure for me to introduce this session. And I was saying earlier on, we tried to, when we did grouping, put them together for a particular reason. And in this particular case, one of the reasons is that these are both BC boys. They're local talent, and seeing as I'm from BC, I really felt an honor to introduce them. And also they're both sort of working on some homegrown products. So this is sort of the BC homegrown session. One of those. I think first up we're going to have Grant Potter, and Grant directs the online learning initiatives for the UNBC, the University of Northern British Columbia, with the Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology. Grant has been pursuing research and development of EdTech for the last 10 years through his work in in the Canadian Arctic, China, and Northern BC. Grant leverages existing and emerging technologies to extend the instructional potential of UNBC course offerings and facilitates the adoption of online distributed learning best practices. Grant holds a number of IT certifications, is an active contributor to various open source projects, and can be found online at his highly readable blog, http://networkeffects.ca. And following Grant will be John Maxwell. John's an assistant prof at SFU in the Master of Publishing program, where he's focused on the impact of digital tech in the cultural sector. He recently finished a PhD in education at UBC on the history of personal educational computing, which grew out of Xerox PARC in the 70s. His current research interests include the evolution of publication technologies, history of computing and new media, and contemporary myth-making in the face of digital media. So I'd like you to give a warm welcome to these two guys. Woo!
All right. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our endeavors to create a platform that would allow us to create a user-generated sort of gaming environment. So it would allow us to have some controls, use some sort of stuff that's gone before, so some stuff that you've seen in Second Life and other types of virtual worlds, but actually be able to sort of take the ingredients apart, throw out the ingredients that we don't really care for, and rebake it and make a tastier cake. So I'd like to first acknowledge the support of BC Campus OPDF Fund. Without their support, none of this would have been possible. The grad students they have working and doing all the heavy lifting here. There's no way we could, our center could have afforded to have them with the project. So it was invaluable. I'd like to thank, shout out to College of the Rockies, Gina Bennett, for helping to do some user testing, in which we are still in the midst of. I'll remind you, this is not a finished project. This is very much a work in progress. So things that you'll see, some of them are actually live and up, and I'll show you how to connect to this in about 10 minutes. But a lot of this also is stuff that's sort of in dev right now. We haven't released it into the wild, so it will be out there soon. We didn't create this. Basically, we took a project called the Open Simulator project, which is basically an open source. Second Life has taken their client a couple years ago and released an open source so people can go and rework the client. It was about a year and a half ago. The microphone? Okay. Okay. Mic check. Okay. About a year and a half ago, the Open Simulator project emerged, which was an open source implementation of the Second Life server, or so like the main, sort of like what you see on the main grid when you log into Second Life. So what is OpenSim? It's a 3D application server, just like you have seen lots, from 2006 or maybe earlier if you were following virtual worlds and developments and such. But the difference is you can get in, you can get your claws on the code on the server side, and you can extend it using some different types of modules. So I'm going to show you a couple different things that we've done using some of this extensible components, using and applying these modules in new ways. So what sorts of extensions? Well, one being physics simulations with alternative engines. If you don't necessarily like the physics in a certain type of simulation, you can actually rebake your grid with some different types of physics. And so far, we've gone through 3 physics engines, and the first physics engines had Gina stuck, down by the coast and underneath a barn. She was trapped there for a little while, and she was doing some testing for us. But we applied some new physics, and so we've got that all worked out. And another great thing is that you're not stuck using LSL, which is the Linden scripting language. You can use like C# or you can use Java. You can use a range of languages to develop some applications that will be running on the server side, which is great because how many students or grad students will come to you, do you know LSL? What the hell are you talking about, right? But I mean, they might know Java, they might know VB, like, or like .NET, different things like that. So we can sort of take advantage of some of those skill sets that might be floating around. So what does this support? It supports multiple worlds in a single application instance. That basically means we can have a whole bunch of different simulations going on in one server, right? Not just regions, but completely different worlds. So if we wanted to have, well, I'll show you a local government simulation, we can have that running on the same server. We don't need two instances. We also are developing a nursing simulation, like triage interview skills in our simulation, so we can have that running on the same server. Supports multiple clients and protocols, mean I can connect with my Second Life client, or if I can have some other, all the different clients that release, like there was a company called OnRes that built a custom client for the simulation, what was that, CSI. They built a custom client. So you could connect to BC OpenSim using your CSI OnRes client if you want. So why did we use OpenSim? Why didn't we just use Second Life? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons why we chose to start in exploring OpenSim. We are interested in developing a game-based simulation platform for teaching and learning. And we looked at all the different stuff that people were doing, and they're doing some interesting stuff, but we had a couple problems. I timed a tweet to go out, so you may have seen a link to this presentation. Anything that's underlined in this presentation is hyperlinked. So if you want to ramble off to the side, you can click on any of those links that you see underlined behind me, and they'll take you off to the things I'm talking about. We wanted to overcome some of the barriers. And some of the barriers to using Second Life or other types of virtual worlds are really outlined well in a wiki that's hyperlinked there under barriers. That and also BC Campus funded project that was exploring the potential virtual environments for teaching and learning. So I encourage you to take a look at that wiki. So what are some of those barriers in a nutshell? The cost. If you want your own island, it's ridiculous. It's like thousands of dollars, and you have to pay thousands of dollars every year. So that was the a showstopper right there. We can't afford it. We can't afford to do things in those environments. So another huge benefit, what I'll show you, is content portability. Let's say if I build this fantastic sim, somebody, let's say University of Toronto says, "Wow, that's awesome. Can you give that to us?" If it's on Second Life, yeah, there's probably some way you can sort of work through Linden Labs and get that shifted over. Or in OpenSim, I can use something called an OAR file. I can say, sure, pop that, zip it up, send it off to them as a tarball, and then they can unpack it and they can have it exactly as we had it in our context in theirs, and they can work with it. So I'll show you what that looks like. So that was a huge benefit for us. A couple other barriers that I outlined in that wiki. Let's say if you want to have a role play or you want to have some sort of an online game, you want to have the whole class go in. I've tried that before, and just in workshops with faculty and stuff, and everybody's sort of like, how do I get in there? So what we've done is set it up so you can register a whole class, and you can have them so that when the whole class can enter at the same time, you can have all the characters or non-playing characters or role play. You can have all that kind of stuff pre-assigned, so people can just log in and don't have to worry about customization and all that sort of stuff. That stuff can be all done beforehand. But in particular, we were looking at using a simulation for local government, and we wanted to have specific roles for specific students, so those all can be pre-assigned. Because if a role play is taking place a limited amount of time in a classroom, in a lab, maybe over 2 weeks, you don't want to have to be assigning homework to students to saying, okay, you got to go in, you got to customize your character, all that kind of stuff, so it gets over those boundaries. Landmarking and bookmarking. In some projects we were considering, how do we get students when they go into these game environments to where they want to be? So with OpenSim, we can set all those up beforehand in the character inventory so that when they're in that role play environment or that game-based environment, the character has everything in their asset library that they need. So it was an easy way for us to do it all on the server side. Well, as I said, OpenSim was offering us multiple client and protocol support. One client that I'm using mostly is an open source viewer called the Hippo OpenSim viewer. It just allows you to jump through different types of grids and different servers. And that's hyperlinked, so if you want to go download a copy of it, feel free. One huge benefit that we have not fully explored yet, but we are going to, is that if you've ever spent any time in some of the user-generated multi-user environments, the build tools, they're not easy to use. They're not really intuitive. You know what's intuitive? Google SketchUp's intuitive. That's easy. You can go in there and you can build stuff. Google Warehouse we can take advantage of that in OpenSim. So there's a module that you can use on the back end of OpenSim to actually bring in this incredible vast array of all these builds in the Google Warehouse. So that's all the 3D stuff that you see when you're zooming in on Google Earth and you see like 3D-dimensional projections. So why spend 6 months or 7 months paying somebody to design all this stuff and in Second Life and you have that one-shot deal? Or you could just go in and pilfer stuff from Google Earth. Or it's there for the pilfering, so right? So you can set up your own cities that are just, like representations of actual physical spaces. Not only just buildings and such, but props and different things. So if you're trying to crunch down your development time for a role-playing game online, Google Warehouse is the money. So, as I was saying, shareability and portability of resources. Now, I'm going to actually, I should have logged in beforehand, but I'm going to show you what I mean by this OAR file. This is the OpenSim viewer. And I'm just going to log in here. And I'm going to show you on one of the maps what I mean by portability of content. Sorry for the wait. I should have logged in beforehand. All right, so when I bring up a map, and it starts to generate the land, notice that frame on the top, it looks exactly the same as the frame on the bottom, but except that they have different names. This one on the top is called BC OpenSim, and the one on the bottom is called the test region. So I could take that, all that we did in this example is take that grid, right, and just make an OAR file of it, and copy it back into the world. Same thing. So you see the geometry of the map is exactly the same as a carbon copy. So all that stuff that you put in there, all the interactions, any scripted objects, non-player characters, all that kind of stuff, you can just take it out and pop it back into a new environment, or a totally new server, or another instance of a server, another instance of a region and a world. So that was a great way for us to actually share stuff. So not only allow us to have some portability, but if somebody else expressed an interest in using some of our stuff, we can do that. We don't have to try to pluck out one piece at a time and transfer it over to somebody at another institution. We can say, here you go, here's a whole world, run with it. So that was a huge benefit. So let me move on. We're here. What am I doing for time? All right. One other thing that it offered us was something called a hypergrid. And there's an example of what a hypergrid looks like. So it's basically, this is what you could do. In this example, here's my region, or here's my sim, here's my game. And let's say somebody at Acadia University, one of my alma maters, if they they have a fantastic sim, and I think, wow, it would be great if some of the characters in this game could pop over to their game or their simulation and then pop back to ours, sort of traverse these two different sims. What you can do is you can punch a hole in your world, and you can actually make it so that they can teleport over to their world with all their assets and interact in their simulation and come back to yours. And same with them. They can come over to yours, and you can interact on the same thing. So this is a way of just like on the main grid in Second Life, once you're on the main grid, you're sort of in their space. So what hypergrid allows you to do is it allows you to kick down a fence and sort of walk over to somebody else's grid, which is kind of nice. So a couple tools for assessment. So that's all fine and dandy, but how do we track? Because people are interested in tracking students and student activities. So how do we track that? There's a couple different things we can do by leveraging some existing tools. You might have heard of this project. There's an open source project called the Sloodle. So it's basically using some Moodle tools or objects that are some three-dimensional objects that talk back to a Moodle installation. So here's a couple videos that I'll have my alter ego here take us through. Luckily, he's a mime, so he's not going to talk. So in this example, I'm just going into my inventory. This functions in Second Life, but it functions really well in OpenSim too. The port is really quite good. So and this is kind of goofy, but this is just classroom gestures. Sometimes people always say, well, in a virtual environment, sometimes you lose some of the nonverbal cues, right? So this is a way that you can bring a little heads-up display and inject some nonverbal cues. This is my avatar being cheeky. So I'll skip ahead here to my favorite part of this toolbar. And something that we're made some progress on. You'll see that my avatar, or in this example, I've just clicked on blog. What I'm doing when I click on blog, this is phoning home to the blog that's in Moodle. But what we're trying to do is adapt this, and so far we're having some luck. We're not quite there yet. So we can blog in the text area here and pass it to the Moodle blog, but we're very close to actually passing it through to WordPress. But we have a little bit more work to do. So we wouldn't necessarily restrict the avatars to blogging in Moodle, but they would be able to sort of cross over to WordPress. Like I said, it's in dev, coming soon in the fall of 2009. So that's just called a heads-up display, or the little toolbar. No, he does not. But that would be a great added feature. Okay, so a couple other things. There's when I was talking about barriers to implementing these virtual worlds and teaching, is quite often people say, "Well, what sort of hardware do I need to run this?" And, that's usually the very first hurdle, right? You need to have graphics cards and all this kind of stuff. You need a fairly new computer and blah blah blah. So how can you have dialogue? How can the students that want to be in this role-playing environment communicate with the people that are not able to be? And believe me, at UNBC, we have some people that are right in Prince George, but a lot of people live out in very small communities with, on dial-up, and there's just no way that they're going to get access to these kind of environments. So we started exploring ways that we can bridge those two environments. So this is just an example of bridging a virtual space to a browser-based thing. So this is the chat, and here's my avatar again. So what my avatar is going to do in this example is just going to take out an object that's going to phone home to the Moodle server. So he's just going into the inventory there, taking it out, slapping it on the table. And when he activates it, it will, I'm opening my chat window here just so you can see the talking back and forth between the chat here. I'll skip ahead a little bit. So basically I'm telling this object to start recording the chat. So if you had a bunch of other people sitting around this table chatting, or some other activity where there was some sort of text dialogue, doesn't have to be sitting at a table, it starts recording all the text chat that's going on in that activity, and then passing it through the Moodle chat room, so the people that don't have the hardware to be there can still sort of participate, because when the people are in the chat room type in something, it passes it back through the object, broadcasts it to all the avatars that are sitting around the table there. So that's just one example of how we can use some modules on the server side to bridge some of those barriers, and using virtual worlds like this for teaching and learning. I'm not going to watch the whole video, but it's there for you to watch. That is hyperlinked. If you're following my presentation on your own laptops, you can click on that, and it takes you to a wiki that we have at UNBC that'll take you through the steps of how you can connect here. We do not have creating your own account sort of stuff set up right yet, but there is a form, and we're watching the form, so we're creating accounts as they roll in manually, but soon we'll have those auto-created. So a few more things I wanted to talk about before I skid to a stop and see if anyone's got any questions. What does OpenSim look like at UNBC, and why would we consider using something like this? So this is where you are right now, because I know a lot of you are from far and wide. So you're in Vancouver, and this is what we're talking about right here, so up in the north. So all that shaded area are all the different communities that University of Northern British Columbia either has a campus in, or has students in, or in agreements with colleges that run programs and such. So it's a very wide area with, and that dot here is the broadband dot. Everything else, no, I'm just kidding. It's not. There's broadband other places, but I mean, not everybody's got the broadband. All right, so so simulation and game-based learning using OpenSim, what's that going to look like? We first started to get the seed for this was a faculty member in nursing, and the nursing students are spread out all over the north and are in practicums and such, but there's still taking courses in a very distributed fashion. And she was interested in how can we actually build some sort of a game-like environment where the students can actually shape some of the environments themselves. Like if there was, she's asking, are there any real simple tools that we could give students to shape some of that environment ourselves? And is there any way that we could simulate an interview? I started exploring that idea, and I thought, well, it must be possible. I read lots of things and people doing kind of similar things in Second Life, but I don't really want to go in Second Life. I want to have something here that I have more control over. So we started exploring how we could use chatbots as non-player characters. So we don't want to have any faculty member going in there touching any kind of code whatsoever. We want to have a very simple way of programming the logic of a character, and the faculty members are the subject experts, and we want them to actually program that logic, but in a very simple way. So we started setting up a very simple form, a way that faculty members could create these characters. So this won't be live for some time because this is something I've been working on off the side of my desk. So it won't be live for some time, but it's getting there. A form that looks a little bit like this, and they can fill this logic in for this character. That eventually I want to get it to look something like this, where we'll have a catalog of characters that through a number of interactions from the nursing faculty, they're able to build some profiles for these NPCs. So the non-player characters will look like these kind of people in this gaming environment. Now this is not a whole course. Keep this in mind. We're not thinking we're going to do this for an entire course, but maybe for 1 week or maybe for a particular lesson. So that's how we're using OpenSim in our context for that example, and we couldn't do that at Second Life. So another example, an instructor co-authored this book, Local Government in Action, which is a series of classroom-based simulations, and was interested in how we could move some of those classroom simulations into a video game-like environment. So we started looking at how we've started the steps of deconstructing some of those simulations, if that would be in the face-to-face class, and putting them in some sort of a video game environment. So we don't have any real builds yet or anything like that, but I'm going to loot Google Warehouse and I'll build some stuff, and then we'll work out how some of those face-to-face stuff would play out in a video game situation. All right, so if you're interested in participating in BC OpenSim, because we need some help, if you want to come in and you want to just try out the physics engine, you want to experiment with some of our builds and give us feedback, all feedback, positive and negative, is welcome, because we're trying to actually improve this and make it better. We've only just passed the midpoint of the project, because we got a lot of growing to do yet. That's an active link. You can click on that and you can sign up. And I'm almost out of time, and I want to stop for questions. Question. Fly at her.
First one, real short. BC OpenSim, is that also the same work British Columbia, University of British Columbia working for Procade? You guys coming from the same?
No, we are not. That's another project, an awesome project. That's not affiliated with this one, no.
The other one is probably pretty quick too. We've got a problem in New Zealand where, in Second Life, their culture is to use note cards, and they hate using the inbuilt browser for some reason. But the problem with that is that we are double handling the information, because we've got information on the web. We want to have this stuff coming in on the note card or looking prettier. Mm-hmm. You guys got anything like that?
No, we were exploring some of the ways of displaying it on textures, and we haven't done with the note cards yet. But that is technically very possible. We haven't sort of cracked. Yeah, we haven't cracked that nut yet, but that's a great one. Anyone else? Yeah.
You're building this as a platform for UNBC and its affiliates to use for whatever?
We are actually building this as a platform for any post-secondary institution in BC who would like to experiment with a video game-based environments that we can pass over some of the user-generated control to users.
Example, is that coming from an existing?
That's a project. It's in infancy right now. That's a project that I'm working on at UNBC. But if people are interested in working on that and using that in other contexts, by all means, I'd be really interested in that. Yeah. Pardon me? No, anywhere. Come on down. Yeah. So, if you want to participate in BC OpenSim, that's great. If you want to take an OER file, like if you want to play around and say, well, actually I could use that in my context, well, happy to share the OER file with you. Yeah.
So, if there's any more questions, then we'll save those two items. We want to let John have a chance. Maybe we'll get it a hand.
Sure. gear.
To have the right gear done.
Yeah.
You think I come to a show like this?
I have a collection of these things on my desk. That doesn't look good, does it? Come on. Let's just give that a little black.
You're frozen here.
Is it raining outside?
No, you're just
It's frozen.
you're frozen.
Brent,
Okay, well let's.
do you have a problem with,
I've run into that before trying to connect to a projector and have this thing freeze up. So I know how to fix that. Fix it like that. So I'll start by. So I'm John Maxwell, and I'm a faculty member at the Master of Publishing program at SFU, not thankfully up the hill at SFU, but actually downtown here at SFU Harbor Center, a fact that I am grateful for every day that I go to work. And I'm going to be talking about some work that I've been doing for a long time, which isn't my sort of primary area of research, but it ends up actually chewing up a lot of my time because I like it and it's my pet project. And it has to do with how I support the work that we do technologically, how we run our web services, how we extend the classroom, all of that kind of stuff. I need to log in. Is it going to come up? That looks promising. And it's stuff that I inflict on my grad students and undergraduate students every year as well. So I want to talk about Wiki. And I mean, you know what's really interesting is coming off of the Gardner Campbell and Jim Groom sort of virtually in there. And Jim, of course, talked last yesterday about this kind of stuff is I have this sort of feeling that I have to justify what I'm about to present in the face of that whole edu-glue personal infrastructure kind of way of doing things. And I keep wondering if I'm outdated and what I'm going to do. And some of you, how many of you have heard me talk about wikis and Thinkubator and stuff like that before? I'm homegrown enough to have talked to, okay, not so many people. Okay, good. So, oh, look at that. Good old Firefox. It launched with all my tabs intact. We're not seeing it now. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, right. Yeah, it's just a matter of doing the mirroring thing. So, but what I want to talk about, I think, is architecture, because I think the architecture piece is I think what's either missing, or at least there's a different point of departure from what I want to talk about than the sort of amazingly brilliant stuff that's coming out of people like Jim Groom. And what Gardner was saying just an hour ago. I'm not yet sure about how to find the comfortable space between what I'm about to present and what that's about, but I'm really thinking about it hard. Anyway, what Wiki represents, and I think everybody understands this, is about a collective experience, right? A collective generative experience. And I think that's one point of trying to understand how these things fit together in the sense that all right, here, I'm going to stop talking. All right, so there I am, exploring openness with Thinkubator. Okay, so what I'm talking about with Wiki is an open writing system as opposed to an open wiring system. And I think a lot of what I'm seeing with the edu-glue and all of the concepts around that has to do with a sort of a wiring system for putting individual feeds together, putting individual personal cyber infrastructure together and feeding things together in RSS. And I think that stuff is absolutely brilliant. But it's not the whole story, and I want to try to talk about a little bit of the other part of the story. I've been talking about wikis for a long time. I've been using wikis for about 6 years, and I adopted them in the classroom as a way of doing things. It's a fundamentally different kind of a thing than a blog, right? It's a different organizing principle. They're both very simple, they're both very straightforward, they share a lot of things in common, but there's some fundamental differences. The organizing principle of a blog is a reverse chronological listing of personal reflections and things sort of surrounding that, right? And I'll pick on Jim just a little bit and note that Jim's presentation here yesterday was a reverse chronological series of slides through his blog posts, which is an interesting way to conceive of a presentation, right? As reverse chronological. That's the blog mentality. The wiki has a different set of sort of organizing constructs to it. It's not chronological specifically. It's not about personal reflection. It's an open writing space that tends to reflect a community of people, a collective of people working together on something. That's a subtle difference, it's a conceptual difference, an intellectual difference, and I think it has some really interesting pedagogical implications that I'll try to talk about. It's about writing. It's not about wiring, it's about writing. Writing is interesting in that it's both process and product. There's a huge literature of stuff on writing as a learning process, writing across the curriculum, all kinds of interesting stuff that's been written over the past 3 or 4 decades about writing as an interesting thing. My sort of personal theoretical position comes from constructionism, right, which is the MIT Media Lab version of constructivism, where it's not just that we're discovering and creating knowledge structures for ourselves, but we're doing it through shared artifacts. That was the Media Lab, Seymour Papert kind of way of looking at things in terms of learning theory, that we're creating things, we're sharing them with others, and it's in that sharing them with others part where the interesting stuff goes on. And of course the internet is all about that, and I think that's where all the really sort of fertile research and thinking has been about. And I think wikis are a really nice embodiment of this way to do things, because it's all about the shared artifact, right? It's not just the shared artifact as, here's the thing that I did, you can look at it, you can retweet it, you can reuse it, you can remix it, but it's really the shared construction of the artifacts that I think is interesting there. It's not about access to resources, it's not about any of that kind of stuff, right? I think all of these things, I think the wiki approach and the personal cyber infrastructure approach are all about abundance, right? They're about an abundance of resources. They're not about access to resources. They're not about licensing. They assume openness. And when we assume openness, we get to do a whole bunch of interesting things. So wiki is open on, I think, 3 really important levels. First of all, the sort of mundane level of open source software. Most wiki software is running on an open source base. In fact, maybe all of it, but it seems to me most of it. That's the least important part of it. The second part is open content or open data. Open content, if you come from David Wiley's point of view. Open data, if you listen to Tim O'Reilly. Grant's thing about the OAR files is exactly that, right? There's open content. You can move it from place to place. You can redo things with it. Where wiki goes to the third step, and why I think this is really important, is about open architecture. Now, architecture is a really interesting thing to think about, and I think this is my point of departure. What I've found through the research that I've been doing with wikis, building things and using them in a whole bunch of ways, is that wiki can be used in a whole bunch of different ways, right? It can look like a reference work, and the obvious example is Wikipedia, where most people kind of come to the concept. But a wiki can look like a blog. We took our system called Thinkubator. One of the very first things we did with it was we said, well, let's just build a front end to it that does reverse chronological listings, and voila, we had a blog. And not only blog did we have not only a single blog, but we had a blogging platform, because you could sort of pull that from any point in it, and you had blogs. We had discussion fora happening right in there, and the same kind of thing, that the malleability of this thing is just an open-ended writing space that a whole bunch of people are participating in. You could tailor the UI, you could do some design tweaks, you could do, most importantly, editorial administration on the thing to make it look like discussion forums. It could look like a book. I happen to have written my PhD dissertation using the wiki as the writing tool. So it was arranged like a book. It had chapters and subsections and a hierarchical structure. Worked perfectly well for that. It works like PowerPoint. You're looking at my wiki right now, right? And I would argue in terms of the sort of larger theme here that it can look like a content management system or a course management system or a learning management system or whatever you want. The important point about openness in the open architecture thing is that we're going to let the learners have some input into what that architecture is. Instead of that being predefined by the software developer or by the company that develops the software or the salespeople that sells it to your institution or whatever, right? That we're going to have a system that's flexible enough and malleable enough to talk about allowing the learners or the educators or whoever it is, the participants in the system, to shape the system. It relies on simplicity. The most important thing about wikis is that they're dead simple. They're almost featureless, right? It's just like, it's a page. You can write on it. You can link from one page to the other. That's it. That's all it does. But in that simplicity is malleability and flexibility and the ability to reconceive that space as a lot of different things. Real openness relies on simplicity for accessibility, right? I mean, Linux is a great example of an open system. But the average person on the street can't do anything with it because it's not simple enough, right? So there's a need to build things to simpler and simpler levels. Jim's been complaining lately about WordPress multi-user, which is a brilliant system. It's relatively simple, but it's not quite simple enough to manage things like upgrades and plug in dependencies and stuff like that, right? So there's a need for things to be even simpler. I'm interested in how the simplicity works in a system like OpenSim, but we can talk about that later. So the original chasm crosser is this guy named Mark Guzdial. How many people have heard of Mark Guzdial before? Almost nobody, couple people. He's a computing science prof from Georgia Tech, who is the original guy that saw the wiki technology, which has been around since the 90s, as an educational thing. And he wrote this really, here, I'll show you what Mark Guzdial looks like. Here he is in Wikipedia. Professor in the School of Interactive Computing at Georgia Tech. He had this article in 2002. He was working on various ways of trying to get bulletin board kind of discussion forum software to work with web accessible resources. And they had a bunch of runs at this, and it didn't work terribly well, and they were running into troubles, and they were having trouble supporting the faculty and whatnot at Georgia Tech. And they stumbled upon wiki technology, which had been around for a few years, and they saw that this was now simple enough to be malleable by the teachers, by the faculty themselves. And so they wrote this paper in 2002 called what's it called? I'm going to blow it here. Beyond Adoption to Invention, right? Allowing the educators and learners themselves to invent applications that the developers had not anticipated. And that's a function not of some kind of genius in how the thing goes together. It's a function of it being dead simple, right? So instead of having to worry about adoption, which was their primary sort of instructional support challenge, was they would build a system or they would install something, and then they had to train people, and they had to build the mindset and the shared culture so that people would know what to expect and what to do with the software. It was a big headache, took a lot of administrative overhead. Here was a system that had almost no administrative overhead, which then people could start to dream up ideas with. And I like a lot the OpenSim idea, right? Because that's kind of the idea of what you're doing, is you want to build a platform and allow people to invent uses for it. So there's definitely some shared ideas there. So after Guzdial, various people pick it up. But where I think it really gets interesting, and where it's really mattered in the stuff that I've done, and I'll do some show and tell in a minute, is the idea of wiki as a writing space, right? As a collective autoethnography. So if anybody's read anything about ethnography, you take this idea from anthropologists going out into the field and writing down how some other culture works. I mean, that's the old kind of version of it. It's been picked up in healthcare and education and all kinds of things as a general way of talking about how people actually do things, what's significant to people, what people mean when they talk about various things, right? And so it's been picked up in educational research. It's been picked up in organizational research. Xerox famously has institutional anthropologists that study what they do. Wiki is a system as a shared writing environment for doing collective autoethnography. That is a group of people working together over time to write about themselves, to write about the encounters that they're having with intellectual material, with what their experiences are, and writing that as a shared kind of thing. Ethnography, famously in the sort of anthropological literature, is again this sort of hybrid process and product. It's the written artifact that comes out of it, but it's also, the really interesting stuff is in the process. How do you get there? How does that interpretive process work when you're writing? And what happens when we bring it online and we do it on the web is that interpretive process is a shared process, if we can glue it together well enough. So within the classroom, and where I started with this, most of my classroom stuff is a graduate seminar. So I have grad students, which is sort of the easiest possible pedagogical challenge, right? You have a bunch of people that come to you that are already really smart, already bought into the whole thing that you're trying to do. They're already self-selected, so they're easy. Graduate seminars are beautiful, right? Because you get a bunch of smart people around a table and you throw some learning objects out there. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's some articles, maybe it's some piece of research, and everybody reflects on it, right? So in that kind of sense, the whole idea of building a community of inquiry around it, of building shared culture, is exactly what you want to do in a graduate seminar. Interestingly, that's what they do in kindergarten really well, from judging from my son's experience. The intervening years, it's not quite so clear, but kindergarten and grad school work really well this way. But Wiki is like the perfect tool to do that, because it embodies that discourse, right? That collective inquiry process that a graduate seminar doesn't just have to go into the air and then fall dead on the table when everybody leaves, or have some kind of representation in people's heads as they go out the door, but it lives on, and it's strengthened tenfold by the fact that you're writing things down, you're reading what other people are doing, you're commenting on what other people have done. And I'm sure this is familiar to anybody who's been blogging and commenting on blogs. The difference is that idea of a shared instrument, where we start to devalue the individual voice, and we worry less about aggregating individual voices, and we look more at the shared culture. So the graduate seminar that I teach most of the time, I do this every spring, I've done it for 8 years or something like that now, is a course called Technology and Evolving Forms of Publishing. So I take people that are interested in the publishing industry, and we have a graduate seminar that talks about new media and digital technology, which is the kind of thing where it changes from year to year, it changes all the time, and the only way we can do anything effective with that is to get people to build a culture of practice around that, right, and a discourse around that. So we take people that don't know anything about digital media, and we try to get them conversant with it. And so that's what happens in the wiki, and I'll show you a little bit of how this works. We have this thing called Thinkubator, which is just a big honking mess of wiki pages. One aspect of it looks like this, which is sort of our public-facing front end, which looks like a group blog, and this is very simply the reverse chronological listing of recent postings, and it's like job postings and reflections on current news and stuff like that. But underneath that, we have in a different set of skins, we have student work projects. So this is one that I did this spring with a team of 6 of my students, where they put together sort of a comprehensive reference work, the Wikipedia model, on techniques for promoting books online. So this thing runs to, I don't know, it's something like 50 pages worth of stuff, and it goes on. It's kind of it's laying fallow over the summer, but the next crop of students will come on and build onto this one. And then we have a bunch of other things. Here's one that I've got running basically the syllabus, course notes, and resources for an undergraduate course that I teach in the fall, right? So here I'm using, the original impetus of this was I needed to build a web page for the course. I could use WebCT because SFU is a WebCT institution, or I could build my own web pages, and I thought I'll build my own web pages. And I thought, wait a minute, why don't I just use the wiki for this, because it's way quicker than building web pages, because it's a little content management system. And then it's like, well, why don't I pour everything in here? And eventually you get to the point where, well, why don't the students do all their work in here as well? So what I've got here is the second round of term papers from my grad seminar this year. We did 3 rounds of term papers. And so all of my notes go into it. All of their written work goes into it. In a couple of the classes we mandated peer review. So you'd write a paper, and then you'd pair off with somebody else in the class, and they would have to then read your work and comment on it. And the beautiful thing that happens naturally in it is you start getting people citing each other across, right? So by the time you get to the third paper, people are referring to what so-and-so wrote in the second paper, and so on and so forth, right? And then in the classroom, everyone's referring to what had gone on. So we're getting that sort of graduate seminar community of inquiry thing embodied in text, embodied in this big, nice shared object, which starts to present some interesting problems. A little bit of history. This one, the public-facing one, has existed since about 2005, and it's got something like 1,500 pages in it now, a lot of which are student work. So that's papers on digital media and in the publishing industry and that kind of thing. It got unwieldy. Nobody could find anything in it anymore because the sort of density of links went out. So now the model that I'm using is much more of this. Sorry, not that one, this one. This kind of thing where, actually let me pop over to another one, where I have, log in. There we are. So I've got a whole bunch of these things. So what we've got is, this is kind of the wiki version of WordPress multi-user, right? Where we've got one host and then multiple wikis running off of it. We can run as many of them as we want. They're all running off the same domain name, but we could do domain mapping on them. So we've got a book that the Canadian Centre for Studies in Publishing has produced. So Wiki is a content management, publishing research notes There's a course, Communications 478. Here's a research project that I've got that's got interviews and notes and things like that from various people. A set of slides and presentations for a workshop. Graduate student writing, this is the only one that's visible. We've actually done this several times where my grad students, when they're writing their graduating thesis, they use the thing as their writing project too. A whole set of notes and various things on content management for magazine publishers. This stuff that I'm drawing from right now, all of my collected works on wikis, so on and so forth, more courses, a book chapter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We get down to the bottom when they're XML production. We're using the wiki as the platform for doing content management to drive print workflows, right? Because anything that runs on the web, be it a wiki or WordPress or what have you, is HTML content, which is XML, can be reeled out to other kinds of things through XML transforms. So we've got all kinds of stuff going on using Wiki as a sort of basic platform. And it's a basic platform because it's dead simple, right? I don't have to install features. I don't have to install plugins. It's all just text. It's all text. All the administration is editorial, right? When I want to change how the navigation works, we edit how it works, right? I mean, this is a bad example, but I'll take you back to, because that's just the automatically generated thing. Here's my, this is my little history project. So I've got all kinds of different navigational things going on, right? The front column here is like, okay, so this is just, you know, hand bombed in. If I want to change what goes up and what goes down, I just edit this. We implemented a tag cloud kind of a thing, which is just basically which pages link to which other ones. Expose that as a, you know, sort of metric of how big things are. Then we have a sort of the hierarchy of pages in terms of how they've been linked. So all of these pages were created from this one, and so there's a kind of virtual hierarchy. There's the reverse chronological listing. There's a whole bunch of ways you can slice and dice this content based on just sort of the automatic stuff that accrues from a whole bunch of people building things. One of the things we haven't ever done is to create a navigational interface based on who created what. It's all in there. The system knows it because it's not wide open. Our students and our community have to log in order to access this thing, because otherwise you get massive amounts of spam. So we could very simply create an interface to it that says, okay, just show me all the stuff that I've written, or show me all the stuff that Susan has written. It's never occurred to us. It's never seemed like it was that important. It was much more important to create things thematically, associatively, in terms of their sort of provenance, maybe reverse chronologically, that kind of stuff, right? So I mean, the question in terms of content management or course management systems, how far can you stretch this before it loses its conceptual integrity, before it loses its simplicity, right? There's a lot more going on in here than in most wikis. Most of it is window dressing, but I don't know how far we can go before you start to run out of that, right? So so our emergent culture then, you know, that I've run for years now through my grad students in the publishing program, through a variety of courses in the communications program where I teach occasional things on the undergraduate level, is this community of inquiry, right? And I found that works well for our limited number of grad students. We ran it 1 year with a second-year communications course with 90 students, and it worked there fine. Richard Smith, if you know Richard Smith, was sort of my mentor there, and he said, yeah, just throw it at them. They'll figure it out. And they did. You know, they figured it out. They needed no tech support. They had no tech problems whatsoever. They just like, okay, we can figure out how to use this. 90 students, no worries at all. I think that's the benefit of it being simple, right? No problems with authorship, no problems with hacking, no problems with people hijacking other people's work. I think that's absolutely remarkable that you can do that. And I think that the result of it in the bottom line is that you're building a shared culture in an environment like this. And along with a shared culture comes a shared ethic. And if that's not core to what we're trying to do with education, I don't know what is. There we go. All of this stuff is online. If you want to just find this, I linked it in off of the attendees list. I have resources if you want to follow up on the bibliography. That's it. Questions? There's one. I'm running it. It's a thing called ZWiki, which runs on the Zope platform, which is really non-standard, but I've been using it forever, and it's beautiful. ZWiki is a very robust platform for wikis. I don't like MediaWiki that much because I think it's too complicated. Like there's too many things in it, whereas the ZWiki one is very, very flexible. So I don't think it matters, though. I think one is as good as the other because it's a writing environment. Way over there.
I think that's really cool that you haven't had problems with
Yeah.
But how do you evaluate and credential a collective auto-economic?
Well, one of the interesting things is that everybody's grown up in this culture, and so the idea of individual authorship is kind of there in the background, right? So somebody writes, what I found, and over years and years and years, somebody writes a term paper, for instance. Somebody else wants to comment on that. They go to the bottom of the page and they add comments on the bottom of it. They don't go back and edit somebody else's work. And I've never said that you shouldn't do that. And there's no technological restriction to anybody ever doing that. That's kind of a built-in kind of aesthetic that we all, it's like burnt into our heads at some point. You know, it's that same thing where we try to get to open content and people go, oh, why would I want to give anything away? Well, the flip side of that is what people are actually extremely respectful of each other. So, the answer about assessment is that I handle the assessment pretty straightforwardly, right? I mark things. We have participation grades. Nothing interesting or nothing out of the ordinary at all. So it's kind of a non-issue.
Do you think that might be shifting with Google Docs and Adobe Buzzword and the sort of and Wiki, the platforms that we have now? I mean, because we haven't had those tools, and the people that you're teaching and working with have come up without those tools.
Yeah, it could be. I don't see it yet. I mean, maybe with sort of the generation that are teenagers now, as they come on, maybe it'll start to happen. But well, and also, I mean, we're publishing students, right? Which is people who start out with, ever since I was a child, I've loved books. So you know, they're kind of particularly bought into that model. So maybe they're easier than most. But even in the the 19-year-olds in communications, they just like automatically understood. It was really quite interesting how that plays out.
So we're over time. But
Are we?
if everybody's interested, why don't we have 2 more questions and then we'll call it a day. I'm sure John's happy to answer some after that.
Yeah, you betcha. Alec?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about that tendency not to work on other people's stuff. I find it's a negative in a lot of the projects that I work on.
Yeah.
And teachers don't want to touch other people's stuff, and we've been desocialized in a way that this is your stuff. When you create a wiki, I create my wiki, and you create your own wiki.
Yeah, right.
And that's interesting. But I was wondering actually about your dissertation, because you said you did it through that process. But was there any way that you could publish it through that as well as, a final document?
Yeah.
Where you have to actually transfer it to.
Yeah, something that's well, that last little bit about XML production is like a pet project of mine that I've been working on for 10 years. How do I take stuff from the web and get it into a real professional print kind of environment or a presentation thing? Yeah, right, exactly. So I did that by hand when I did that a few years back. But this spring, and one of those wikis, we came up with a thing in InDesign CS4. The brand new CS4 has an XML file format, and we did a set of XML transforms to take stuff right out of the wiki and reel it right into InDesign. So that nut's been cracked now.
The process seems to be the barrier, not even the technical process, but the mindset that we actually have to keep. We have to put stuff elsewhere before we can actually. This is acceptable now. No, this is.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's breaking down, I think, definitely. Yeah, I mean, every year that I've spent to try to get to that print production thing, every year the print seems less and less relevant, right?
Yeah.
We're still there, but yeah, back here.
I wonder if you've ever tried to do metrics of the writing, so that you can take people's text to word counts, reading levels, concordances.
Yeah, I've thought about it, but my population is so small that I've kind of not felt that there would be that much of value in it. But it's kind of in the back of my mind, yeah.
Show them the structure of their writing and how it's changed
Yeah.
over time in the program.
That would be kind of a natural thing. I mean, I think if I had an extra couple hours every day, I'd probably get to that.
You might be able to do it in the Zope platform.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just Zope is just Python, so yeah, anything's possible. Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
I think we're going to cut it off there, but join with me and thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks, everybody.